a technical circuit, a car I've never driven before, a competitive grid, and only 2 days of practice. I'm just getting my excuses in nice and early as to why I'm not going to do as well as I'd hoped I would do, but here we are for round 3 of Children of the Mountain. Winning the last race gave me a good starting position for this one, which means that I can learn quite a lot from the guys who are ahead of me on the grid, who were much quicker than me. And trust me, considering the track and car combo this week, I was going to need it because it was very, very tricky. It was pretty much picked and designed to test our all-around abilities in a very tricky part of the map. Not least this section here, the Chicane of Death, which straight away caught out Flores, which is very unfortunate for him considering he was right up there with pace in practice. And coming to the end of the first lap, I was pretty surprised to still be up there with Tilko and Icy. I knew that eventually they would start to pull away from me as they were growing in confidence in the race, but it still gave me a little bit of a boost to see that I wasn't out of my depth and I was actually staying up there with guys who've been in much higher divisions in the past. It's still early in the race, so it's still too early to be taking some of these corners in the way that Icy just did there. That's 2 drivers of arguably D2, D3 pace, pretty much already out of the race, already out of contention for the win. Got a pretty good little brake boost there, catching up to Tilko here. Might I actually overtake for the lead again? Not this time, and especially not if Sharat starts sticking his nose in like that. Compromised my exit a little bit, which meant that I couldn't keep up with Tilko, but to be fair, even if I did catch up to him, I don't think I was close enough on the track to actually put a move in, which is just as well considering, as you can see there, it's only taken him an extra lap and he's already pulled out a pretty significant gap. Is he that much faster than me in raw speed? I'd say it's partly that, but it's also due to the fact that, as you saw there, I'm just absolutely awful at getting brake boosts in this game. I'm also awful at exiting chicanes like that one, as you can see, which is going to invite Sharat down the inside to absolutely dive bomb me. Fortunately for me, I actually managed to get the cut back and get enough speed to keep the position, so that's frustrating the guys behind me for another lap or 2 at least. This is pretty much an exercise in defensive driving straight away. All I've seen for the first 6 laps is just guys' noses coming into the bottom of my screen like that, like Ewan is doing here. He's getting a bit impatient, he just wants to get past me, but I find little tricky brake boosts once again and I somehow managed to keep 2nd place. My rivals from D5 are still keeping me honest as I miss yet another brake boost coming up to the chicane, killing all of my speed, so now I've got to watch out for Sharat behind me again, who goes for the same move that he did a few laps earlier. Takes the same line on the approach, manages to actually keep a tight line on the inside for the 2nd apex, which gives him a better run out of the exit. I still managed to somehow get a better run than him though, which means we can run side by side going onto the stunt bridge. Still a faint hope of keeping this position. Clipped the apex for that one nicely, but unfortunately he managed to get the curb boost line on the outside, which pretty much gave him the position. As gutted as I was about that, I can't really complain too hard because I was holding him up, and Ewan, as you just saw theirs, he brake boosted into the back of me, so really I'm still lucky to be in 3rd after all of that. At this point I was hoping to make use of being behind Sharat to perhaps learn some of his lines, see where I was going wrong and where he was managing to get more speed than me, so hopefully I wouldn't lose too much ground to him, and I was still hoping to keep Ewan behind me, who, as you can see, is still keeping me honest. I imagine he's pretty frustrated at this point. It's very clear that I'm holding him up quite badly. If Sharat manages to get away, I'm sure he'd be absolutely fuming. But I'm still sticking in there, I'm still staying ahead, coming through the chicane of death. Sharat's starting to get away a little bit, and up the inside comes Ewan there. I couldn't really defend that, he just got a much better exit out of the chicane than I did. I thought about leaving it in there for the inside of this chicane, but I thought it'd be better to just tuck in behind him and compound my misery and just see if, again, I can learn something from these guys. If not, then just run my own race and just see where it takes me. These guys are potentially going to even slow themselves up because they're actually having a battle right in front of me. Ewan being forced to run the wide line there as Sharat held the apex very nicely, and it's interesting just watching these two in front of me. It's interesting to just see how much time you lose in a battle with somebody. You don't really notice it until you've got other cars around you where you can actually monitor what your battling is doing to the respective gaps between you. they must have been a second, 2 seconds ahead of me before they started battling going into that turn, and now I'm right back up on them again. So it gives me hope that if they keep battling, then I actually might have a good chance in this one, until Sharat for some reason decides to make a very early pit stop, considering he was running as high as second, managing to keep up with Ewan, who for the first time in the race has some clear air in front of him, but he's not making the most of it as he clips the pole on the inside there, which slows him right down for this section. I managed to get the brake boost and clip some of the bumps on the outside, which gives me a really good run in here. Carried so much speed, and he held a respectable and tight line, which meant that I could basically carry all my speed around the outside and keep the move. That's 2 good moves that I've done in 2 races so far. I'm starting to actually wonder if I am who I actually think I am. This isn't the Lewis that I remember. As we're coming on to lap 10 here, I knew that I still had a bit of a struggle on my hands to keep Ewan behind me and potentially Sharat when all of the pit stops play out. So I wasn't resting on the fact that I did a good overtake there. Still doesn't stop me from getting the chicane absolutely wrong, which means that despite doing that great move earlier, I just gift Ewan second place again, and just to compound my error, I just get that corner completely wrong, and that gives him the chance to drive away. Very frustrating. I'm still in a decent position though, and as you can see, he still hasn't managed to pull away from me as much as his knocking on the door earlier in the race was suggesting that he could do. So I was still in a pretty good place, just running my own race, just making sure I wasn't making any mistakes at the chicane of death, as Ewan just did. That's the 3rd driver that has made a mistake at that section, and I've gifted from that. After his accident, Ewan decided to pit, which was probably a smart move, but it unfortunately means that he falls behind Sharat and Flores as we approach lap 16 of the race, which gives me the rare moment in this race to actually be running by myself without any pressure. And it was probably a result of that pressure which led me to make this decision to pit now, even though I actually had some clear track around me. This wasn't necessarily the best strategic decision looking back at it in retrospect. At the time, and I pretty much knew that at the time when I made it, I was just thinking, I'm just tired, I just need to get a break, reset, and then hopefully have another go. Unfortunately, that meant that I would have to fall behind Sharat, which, I mean, even if I pitted later, I might have fallen behind him anyway, but unfortunately I wasn't fast enough in that stint to get ahead of him. So if I want to claim that place back, I'm going to have to overtake him on the track. I can't rely on a pit stop again. But as you can see, I think it's probably just the confidence of running behind somebody rather than having to look behind me all the time, but I'm actually keeping up with him and giving him a good run for his money here. Now, I am going to preface this by saying that he put nowhere near as many laps into practice for this race than I did, so this battle here probably suggests that if he did have the time to put into it, he probably should be a lot further ahead than me on the track at the moment in terms of just raw speed and ability. But still, I'll take what I can get, and it is what it is. And like I said, it's good to be able to drive behind somebody for once in this race that's not a million miles ahead of me in pace and ability, so I can actually learn from their lines and see what they're doing wrong and I'm doing right like I'm doing here. And I'm going for the same move that I did on Ewan before, and although Sharat runs it a little bit closer than Ewan did, I actually get the move done again. These guys, honestly, they must hate me at this point. That's twice now that they've got ahead. Well, they've got ahead of me a few times, but that's twice now that I've somehow pulled off that move, got ahead of them, and even though I'm miles slower than them, they've found themselves behind me again. And as you can see now, I'm actually starting to pull a little bit of a gap. And I've zoomed in here because I didn't capture it, but as you can see from the red dots on the map, something happened and it basically caused quite a big pile up, and looking at the gaps now, that gave me a nice 8-second cushion between myself and 4th place with around 8 laps of the race yet to go. That was no guarantee that I was going to stay in this position, because as we saw from the fact that I've basically been defending this whole race, if they're much quicker than me, then in 8 laps they could easily pull that gap back up. But I wasn't really thinking about that at the time. I just needed to just get my job done, try and find some speed from somewhere, because I genuinely thought I was going to do a lot better than I did in this race coming into it. But these guys showed me that if I'm going to go into the higher divisions in Children of the Mountain, I'm going to have to find a lot more raw speed and ability from somewhere. I can pride myself on the fact that I've got a good mindset and I've got that good kind of racing instinct and mentality when it comes to extracting the most performance and the most consistent performance over a long period of time. And I do have a good amount of stamina and a good amount of endurance when it comes to these things. But these skills, essentially, if I'm being honest, they essentially make up for the fact that I do lack somewhat in raw speed and ability compared to a lot of these guys, which can only really get me so far. So if I'm going to progress through the divisions, I'm really just going to have to find something from somewhere. But nevertheless, I can still be pretty happy with the fact that despite being surrounded by a lot of guys who are much quicker than me on this track and in this game in general, I've somehow managed to snag 3rd place from this up to Division 3.
Get in there, Lewis.
Big congrats to Williams and Tilco, who were an absolute league apart in this one. And I'll see you guys in Division 3.